Hello, sophomores. I am here to talk to you about chapter 28. So if you would please open your books to the teacher lesson for chapter 28, Christ's Last Supper, and we'll talk about that. The bell just rang for school to end, but it's 3:15, but we're not ending yet. We're still going to keep going. So as I've mentioned before, by the way, I moved the camera closer. Hopefully it'll be easier for you to see what's on the screen this way. And if I have to move it closer yet, let me know and I will do that. We've talked about the timing of this. This is traditionally the Last Supper's on Thursday, which is what the vast majority of Christians believe. They have the Last Supper on Wednesday because they believe that the curriculum believes that those that write the curriculum believe that Jesus died on Thursday, not on Friday. So this meal that is about to take place, there's some disagreement among scholars whether this is the same as the Last Supper that instituted the Lord's Supper, communion, that's in the Synoptic Gospels. I'll just cut to the chase. I believe it is. John does not record for us the breaking of the bread, and this is my body given for you, and the pouring of the wine, and this is my blood shed for you. But in each of the cases in the Synoptic Gospels, as well as in John, that supper, that where the Lord's Supper was instituted, was the Passover meal. And I believe this too is the Passover meal. John just didn't record it. Why didn't he record it? Possibly because he was writing the last gospel to be written, and the other gospels were already not only written, but they were widely circulated. In fact, they were circulated in sort of booklets of all three of them together, and they were very much considered to be scripture at this point. So the story had been told, and in many cases we see John telling different stories than the synoptics, or giving different details on things than the synoptics. So it isn't surprising that he would focus on something else having to do with that Last Supper. So this is Christ's Last Supper, and we will begin with John 13:1. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own, meaning his disciples, who were in the world, he loved them to the end. He loved them not just to the end of his life, but he loved them to the uttermost. He loved them completely. And he's going to show them that love now. So let's talk about this occasion. What is this occasion? It is the feast of the Passover. The Passover Feast is what is taking on, and it was what is going on, and it was the biggest event of the year. Of all of the festivals, of all of the feasts of Judaism, Passover is the most sacred and the best known, probably for people who are not Jewish. And it dated back centuries earlier. And it has to do with it. The story is told in Exodus. The story of the first Passover is told in Exodus 12. And it has to do with Moses and the Israelites. And at this time, the Israelites are in Egypt. They are enslaved in Egypt. And Moses comes after his experience with the burning bush and tells Pharaoh to let my people go. And Pharaoh refuses. And so God sends plagues. And in fact, he sends 10 plagues. And the final one is the one that's being commemorated at the Passover. And over the course of this time, and it's called the Egyptian Passover, it's actually the Jewish Passover, but whatever, that's what they wrote there. It's happened in Egypt. And so with each plague, Pharaoh would harden his heart, and he would say no, 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 and then finally he'd say yes, and then he'd change his mind and say no. Until this 10th plague, this final plague, this most awesome and difficult plague, which was the death of the firstborn of Egypt. And not just the firstborn of humans, but also of animals as well. So the firstborn male of each family, the angel of death would come and would kill the firstborn of of the firstborn male of each family, unless that family had over the doorposts and the top of the door frame the blood of a lamb that was slain to save them. Sound like that's foreshadowing something? That's because it is. And so the first Passover is explained in Exodus 12. And the Israelites, knowing that they are going to be leaving soon, in their traveling clothes, are commanded by God through Moses to have this meal, this very symbolic meal, to commemorate that night and to commemorate what was about to happen. By the way, the Passover feast was a single night. It was followed directly behind it by an 8-day feast, a 7-day feast, called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread because the people had to leave so quickly they didn't have time to let their bread rise. And so part of the celebration of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is anything with leaven is to the point of sweeping out your house, is taken out of the house. And they do not eat anything, the Jews do not eat anything with leaven in it, with rising agents like yeast in it during that time. Still to this day, that is true. Although I will tell you that when I wanted to buy bagels during Passover, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread for my kids at Millard North, the bagel bin did let me in. I had to go in the back door, but they did let me buy bagels. They weren't supposed to be making bagels, but that's okay. So this plague of the firstborn finally convinces Pharaoh, at least for the moment, to let Moses' people go. And on that last night, they had this Passover feast, which is still celebrated to this day. I forgot to look up when Passover was this year, but it's been very recently, I'm sure, because it's very closely connected to Easter. And every part of that Passover meal is symbolic, has some symbolism tied to Israel's slavery in Egypt. So here's what would happen, and the Lord said this will be a permanent Passover. In other words, A, you are to celebrate this every year, but B, it will be permanent in the sense that one day the Son of God will come to shed his blood so that we might be saved from something much worse than Egypt. So on the afternoon of the day Passover began, and the Passover would begin that evening, and it says here the afternoon of Nisan 14, so that would have been during the day in this case, on Thursday. And each family would take a lamb to the temple, and that lamb would be slain, and its blood would be caught in a silver bowl, and then the blood was sprinkled on the altar. The animal was then opened up, and his entrails, his innards, were placed on the altar for sacrifice. But the rest of the lamb went home and became part of the evening meal. Now it says here, here's a picture of what the altar might have looked like and the size of the altar. Now it says here the evening of Nisan 15, we would see that as the next evening. Now, the new day began as the sunset. And so it went from sunset to sunset. Sunset to sundown, actually. But and so this would have been the evening meal of that same day that the lambs were slain. And the lamb was roasted to eat as part of this Pesach, the ceremony, the Passover ceremony. And this symbolic meal, much like when we do the Lord's Supper, we're not eating a whole supper, right? And so parts of this meal are not intended to fill you up. They're intended to remember. The whole point is to remember. And God commanded them to remember what happened that night. So with the guests, in this case, with Jesus reclining on their left arm so that they could eat with their right arms, on low couches or pillows, would recline at the table. That was the customary way of eating. And it would begin with a glass of wine. And there were a number of glasses of wine that were drunk at different points during the ceremony, each with a significance, each with a symbolic significance to the Passover, to the release of the slaves, the Israeli slaves, the Jewish slaves in Egypt. And they would eat bitter herbs to remember the bitterness of their slavery. And they would eat unleavened bread to remember the haste in which they left, and their bread couldn't rise. They would eat a thing called cheroset, which was like diced apples and dates and nuts. It's actually quite good, but it resembled the mortar and the bricks with which they used that mortar, the bricks that they made and the mortar that put it together to remember their bondage, as a reminder of their bondage. And then they would dip some of the bitter herbs into that cheroset, and they would pray the Hallel, a traditional prayer in Judaism. They each part of this, as they would eat the lamb that was signifying, of course, the lamb that was slain and his blood was put over the doorposts, each part was symbolizing some part of their bondage in Egypt. So that is what Jesus was celebrating with his disciples. Now, what was not recorded in John is that he then instituted this new Lord's Supper that would be for the church, very symbolic of our release from slavery to sin and to death because of the blood of the Lamb, because of the blood of Christ. So we're going to walk through most of chapter 13, and we're going to talk about the true Passover lamb. The great irony of this story is that the true Passover lamb was eating this symbolic Passover supper the night before he was to be sacrificed, and he ate it with his disciples. Did he know that this was his last night on earth? Yeah, he did. He knew exactly what was happening. In fact, that's a big reason why he says and does everything that he says and does on this last night. So we're going to focus on Christ as our Passover lamb, and we're going to look at three things about him. The first thing we're going to look at is his knowledge, Christ's knowledge. And here's what it says. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own, his disciples who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. So this passage tells us three things about Jesus. First of all, he knows that his hour has come. He knows that he will be arrested and that he will die on a cross. He knows he will rise again. He knows his hour has come. The cross was not an accident. The cross was God's plan from the beginning, and Jesus willingly submitted to it. He laid down his life for us. And then secondly, he knows what his betrayer is about to do. In fact, the last thing he says to Judas is, what you're going to do it quickly. Interestingly enough, it says that he left, and then the last line is, and it was night. Now, it literally was night. But I think that it wasn't just the darkness of the night sky that Jesus was talking about. It was the darkness in the heart of Judas as well. It was night for Judas spiritually. So he knows who his betrayer is. He's fully aware that Judas was going to betray him. He was fully aware of that all along, and he knows that now that Judas is leaving to betray him. And then finally, he knows his own identity. He knows who he is. He knows he's the Son of God. He's been telling everybody that all along. Before Abraham was, I am. Are you the Christ? I am. Again. So he knows who he is. He knows he is the Christ. He knows he is the Son of God. And he knows that the Father has delivered all things into his hands. So he isn't going to the cross with fear. He's going to the cross, not even with resignation. He's going to the cross with purpose to save us because he loves us. The second thing we see in Christ is his humility. As we walk through this, I'll kind of explain that a little bit to you. But his humility in washing the feet of his disciples. I'm going to read verses 4 through 11, actually. So having loved them to the end, Jesus rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and, taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. You are not aligned with me. You have no part in my ministry. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, the one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him. That is why he said, not all of you are clean. And you can imagine in a Middle Eastern land in ancient times with dirt roads and walkways, and when it rained they became muddy, and people wearing sandals, that their feet became filthy and needed to be washed. And in that society, only servants would wash the feet of their masters. And in some cases, in some communities in Israel, it wasn't just only a servant that did that, a slave that did that. Even Jewish slaves were not supposed to wash the feet of their masters. It was deemed so lowly, so demeaning that only Gentile slaves could wash their master's feet. And then it's unthinkable that this rabbi, this teacher, this one that they called Lord, would wash his disciples' feet. And to picture this is just unreal. This is the only place in all of Roman, Jewish, and Greek writings, the only place in their ancient writings where a superior has washed the feet of an inferior. Nowhere else is that recorded. This is truly unique. And so, as we can see with Peter's response, and I think all of them were shocked. In fact, there's no words recorded about this meal until Peter speaks up in verse 5. Why? Because I think there was stunned silence. I mean, when I picture what's going on here, I picture faces that are like, what in heaven's name? And they can't believe it's happening. And I think they're kind of looking around at each other like, and making motions like, what is, he's washing our feet. And they're looking at each other, and they're probably all looking at Peter, right? The big mouth, and looking at Peter and going, are you going to say something? And so Peter finally says, Lord, you're going to wash my feet? No, that doesn't make any sense. They were shocked and maybe embarrassed. As he begins to wash their feet. You know what's one of the things that's interesting about this? That the synoptics record what happened just before this meal. And I don't know, maybe it gave Jesus the idea to wash their feet, maybe not. But they were having an argument amongst themselves. You want to know what they were arguing about? Who was the greatest among them? Well, I'm better than you. I'm a better disciple than you are. I don't know if Judas, got into that argument at all, but maybe he did. They were arguing about who was greatest. And then they walk into this room and they recline at table, and their master gets up, puts a towel around his waist, begins to wash their dirty, nasty, dust and dirt and mud caked. That's crazy. And so there was stunned silence. And Peter speaks up and says, "You're going to wash my feet?" And Jesus, with love and humility, rebukes him and says, "If you don't let me wash you, you can't be in relationship." And so then Peter again, because he's Peter and prone to overstatement, goes the other way and says, "Then give me a whole bath. If you're going to wash me, wash every part of me." And Jesus says, "No, that's not necessary. Your feet are what's dirty. You've already had your bath." The point of this, he says, because he says, now you guys, you treat each other this way. Stop with the arguments about who's greater and humble yourself. Jesus gave an amazing picture of humility here. And we know that Jesus was humble. And in fact, Paul writes in Philippians 2, this beautiful, beautiful passage, because the Philippians were having trouble getting along. And when you begin to argue with someone, you are not being humble, right? When you want your way and you won't give in to the other person, you're not being humble. And so Paul begins out by saying, if you have any love for me, if you want to encourage me at all, make me happy by becoming like-minded, by agreeing with one another. And then he says, in humility, let each of you look to not only to your own interests, but also the interests of others. And then he holds up Jesus as the example of that humility. Have this mind among yourselves, so as you deal with one another, have the same mind as Christ had. Have the same mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, which was demonstrated by Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, though he was in very nature God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. That word means a thing to be taken advantage of. It's like you take advantage of a weaker person. So you have the power over that person, so you take that advantage. And Jesus could have done that, and he chose not to. And Paul's saying, don't take advantage of each other. Don't use your power to take advantage of others. So have the same mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in very nature God, did not consider equality with God a thing to be taken advantage of, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. There is no better example of humility than this passage. And we also see in this passage the heart of Christ. And we're going to read a couple of parts of this. Christ's heart. It was broken and compassionate toward Judas. It says this. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. That's John. That's how he refers to himself. Remember, he never says me or my or or refer to himself as John. He refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. One of the disciples whom Jesus loved was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. Who was Jesus saying would betray him? The disciple leaning back against Jesus said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I will give the morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered him. After Judas had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what you are going to do quickly. Now, no one at the table knew why he had said this to him, but thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for this feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he, Judas, immediately went out, and it was night. Jesus' heart was broken and compassionate even toward Judas. He saw Judas' need, not his deed. And we see here also, well, we'll continue to talk about Jesus' heart. We'll get to the next one in a minute. We need to remember that behind every sin, behind every disobedient act, is a need in someone's life. I've told you before, I believe, about my favorite, when I had young children, my favorite parenting book, which is called Shepherding a Child's Heart. And one of the things I learned through that is that no action comes forth uncaused. Everything we do, there's a cause for everything we do, whether we even realize it or not. The cause behind this lecture is that I need for you to have something to do next week, and chapter 28 was up next, and so I need to do the lecture, right? Every behavior has a cause. The behavior, and we'll talk specifically about bad behavior. Hopefully this lecture isn't bad, but every bad behavior has a cause too. In fact, in Shepherding a Child's Heart, they gave the example of two kids wanting a toy, right? So you've got these two little kids, and this happened a lot in my house, and one kid's playing with a toy, and the other kid comes and steals it. And how do most parents solve that? Give it back to your sister. She had it first, right? Except that both children's behavior had a cause. And it's the same cause. Selfishness. The one kid stole the toy because he or she was selfish. And the kid that had the toy is angry about it because he or she is selfish. No behavior comes forth uncaused. And usually that bad behavior represents a wrongful need, a need. Every wrongful act represents a need in someone's life. And if we can have compassion for those people, not saying that there aren't consequences. By the way, when I had two kids arguing over a toy, I didn't let either of them have it. And I would tell them, now I have two sinners on my hands, two selfish sinners on my hands. So there are consequences for that behavior. But we need to have compassion. I learned this in a difficult way years ago. There were twins, identical twins. I can't tell you their names. I'll call them J and K. I'm not allowed to. They're grown men now. But this is years ago, one of my first few years at camp, and I've been doing camp for 15 years, by the way. One of the hardest things for me about this virus is the camp has been canceled. So we're hoping to meet with the kids once the quarantine is lifted in some meaningful ways, not at camp. Camp, if you don't remember, is Royal Family Kids Camp, a camp for kids that have lived through abuse and neglect. And these twins, they were a handful. Boy, were they cute, though. Oh, they were so cute, J and K. And they were so cute, and they were naughty. But they came to camp as 7-year-olds, and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11. And then they went on to our teen camp and went to that until they were 18. And we really thought that we had seen some growth and some change in J&K. And I loved them, and I still do. And then I got word that they were in juvenile jail for having sexually assaulted their foster sisters. If those would have been two teenagers I didn't know, I would have been thrown them in jail. And I would have been outraged by what they did. And I am outraged and I am saddened by it. But because of my love for them, I have compassion. Last we heard they were doing better. They were out and doing better. I think anyone's heard from them. No behavior comes forth uncaused. We need to have compassion on others. There need to be consequences. We need to have compassion. Everyone needs Jesus. We're all dirty, rotten sinners deserving hell. In fact, Jesus even honored Judas by giving him the sop. Now, he was fulfilling prophecy. We read today in our Zoom meeting in John 13 that he was fulfilling the prophecy that he who lifts his heel against me will betray me. And so he to whom I give the bread will lift his heel against me, will betray me. So even that was a fulfillment of prophecy. And I think in this act of washing their feet, and even in the act of forgiving Judas, that Jesus was challenging his disciples and us to demonstrate that same kind of love for others. And then Peter in this passage he honors Judas by offering him the sop. Peter in this passage makes some rash statements, right? When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this you will all know all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered him, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. So we see in this whole passage 3 rash statements that Peter makes. Now, I kind of give Peter a little bit more of a pass than others maybe because I identify with him. I am quick to speak up and quick to realize I should have kept my mouth shut. And I think Peter had that same foot in mouth disease that I have. But the first one was, of course, as we already read, "You'll never wash my feet. You're not going to wash my feet." And then Jesus gently tells him, "If I don't wash your feet, you have no part in me." And so in this, he was trying to tell Jesus, so he was trying to tell God what to do. I've been guilty of that as well, telling God what would be best for my life, as if God doesn't know better than I do. Your book says that he was not showing humility at this point, and that may be. But I also think we shouldn't be too hard on him because he was shocked. This was unheard of, literally unheard of, that a rabbi would wash his disciples' feet. So I think maybe we shouldn't be too hard on him for not being humble. But then he says, "Well, then not only my feet, wash everything. Give me a whole bath." He went from one extreme to another, which was pretty characteristic of Peter. He was very emotional and was filled with more emotion than maybe with discernment and really listening to what Jesus said. More zeal than knowledge. And then in verse 37, he says, nope, never wash my feet, not only my feet, I'll lay down my life. I want to back up a little bit here and talk about what's happening, because Jesus first says, I'm not going to be with you much longer and you can't come with me. And then he begins to talk about a new commandment. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. So you shall love one another. This is how the whole world will know you're my disciples, that you love one another. And Peter's silent that whole time. Now, I want to tell you that when it says, I'm going to back up. When it says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. We call, this is happening on Thursday, right? We call that Maundy Thursday. As a little girl, I thought it was Monday Thursday. And that really made no sense to me, because how could it be both Monday and Thursday at the same time? And I remember the day, I don't know how old I was, first grade, second grade, however old I was. And my mother said, no, Amy, it's not Monday, Thursday. It's Maundy Thursday. And I went, oh, great. Still have no idea what that means. And it wasn't until I first studied John years ago now, probably 15 years ago now, that I found out. Maundy is a transliteration, I think, of mandatum, the word for commandment in the Greek. And so Maundy Thursday literally means commandment Thursday. And so this is what it's talking about. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. It's supposed to be a reminder to us to love as Christ loved. Maybe you learned something new just there, just maybe not. So, but then look at this again. So he says, now is the Son of Man glorified, little children, in a little while I'm with you, you'll seek me. And just as I said to the Jews, where I'm going, you cannot come. And then he goes on and he gives the whole Maundy new, commandment thing. And I'm picturing Peter, right? And here's what I think happens. He's listening to Jesus. Jesus says, I'm leaving you and you can't come. Peter's like, wait, what? And Jesus is continuing to teach. I don't think Peter heard any of that new commandment stuff, because he gets through the new commandment stuff. He's moved on from you can't go where I'm going. Jesus has moved on from that, right? And Peter's still like, what is going on here? And then after all that, Simon Peter says, wait, where are you going that we can't come? Right? He just jumps right in the middle of this beautiful sermon that Jesus is preaching to him, and just blurts out, where are you going that I can't come? I'm going to follow you anywhere. And then he gives this rash statement that I'll die for you. And Jesus knows he will someday. But not yet. Peter doesn't have the courage yet for that, and he will indeed deny Christ. I've done that. I have, by my words and my actions, denied Christ. Even when I've said I would follow him anyway. I think we're all guilty of that. I think we shouldn't be too harsh with Peter. Again, I see a lot of myself in Peter. And then we see the disciples' insecurity in verse 22. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. So in the synoptics, they ask the question of Jesus, is it I? Am I the one? Am I going to betray you? It's interesting that they thought that it could be them, right? And in truth, we all have the capacity to betray others. But surely they would know whether in their heart of hearts they had any intention of betraying Christ. So they were insecure. They doubted their own strength to stand for Christ. I'm not sure that that's all bad. I think having an honest opinion of ourselves, knowing that anyone can fall, anyone can make a mistake, anyone can do something hurtful. That's not all bad. But they were insecure about their ability to stand for Christ. But Jesus said, be careful if you think you stand, lest you should fall. And then finally we see the disciples' ignorance in verses 31 through 38. Jesus had talked about being glorified soon. And of course, he's referring to his crucifixion and his resurrection and then eventually his ascension. And of the need for the disciples to live by the rule of love, to love one another. That's how the world won't know we're Christians by our preaching. They won't know that we're Christians by our opinions or by how often we read the Bible. They'll know we're Christians by how well we love each other, and how well we love others as well. And so they didn't understand what Jesus was talking about. Again, we see this theme of misunderstanding in John's Gospel. And they may have completely ignored that statement. And Peter then pipes up, why can't I follow? I want to go. And he's totally ignorant. He doesn't understand what's about to happen. And in the end, we see the disciples' complete failure. And we'll go through this, but in verse 38, it kind of alludes to it, that all the disciples proclaimed their love for the Lord, and their allegiance to him. But within 24 hours, all but one would forsake him. One would betray him. One would deny him 3 times. And 9 would run away from the cross. They would run away in fear. Only John was at the foot of the cross. He was the only one of the 12 that was at the foot of the cross. I think we need to see ourselves in these disciples and take heed, to be careful if we think we stand lest we fall. And renew our commitment to Christ daily and understand that apart from him we can do nothing. We need him desperately. And to love one another. To love one another as Christ has loved us. Well, that's it for today. It's a 43-minute-ish, 44-minute-ish lecture, so I'm going to break it up into 2 days. Yeah, I miss you. I'll see you.